Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2023 Critical Issues Symposium. My name is Madeline, and I'm this year's CIS Director. Thank you. Thank you all for coming, and thank you so much to everyone who has helped make this event possible. In case you don't already know, this year's topic is Discerning Truth in a World of Uncertainty, and we have many speakers lined up to help you explore this topic today. The first set of breakout sessions will start at 1. Professor Shipley will be presenting in the Freed Hemingway Auditorium, while Dr. Ortiz will be presenting in the Graves Hall Auditorium. The second set of breakout sessions starts at 3. Dr. Cook and Dr. Ryden will be presenting in the Graves Hall Auditorium, while Dr. Christians and Dr. Bauman will be presenting in the Scott Auditorium in the Bultman Student Center. The final event of the day will be a reception starting at 4:45 in the family room of the Student Center, and you all are encouraged to attend. You can see all details regarding the breakout sessions and today's topic in the brochure that you hopefully picked up on your way in. Please note that 2 breakout sessions will be happening simultaneously in both sets, so you can only choose 1 breakout session per set to attend. I hope to see you all there. At this time, I would like to welcome onto a stage the man that needs no introduction, Hope College's very own President Scogan.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 2023 Critical Issues Symposium. As you just heard, the question on the table today is, how do we discern truth in an era of uncertainty? And it's a question that is extremely relevant, extremely timely, because we're living in this age of social media and fake news and alternative facts. Hopefully you know this. As an institution, Hope College, we believe in truth. Simple as that. But not only that, not only do we believe in truth, more importantly, we believe in a God who personifies truth. Jesus has this stunning line, this world-changing line where he says, "I am truth." He doesn't say, "I'll show you how to find truth." He says, "I am truth." He personifies it. And what that means for us is it means that as we pursue truth, we are, by definition, pursuing God. And it means that as you study and as you do research and as you do all the things that make up Hope College, you're pursuing truth, and then, by definition, you're pursuing God, which is, in part, why a Christian academic institution like Hope College makes so much sense. It's also why we want to be a place that can authentically put big questions on the table. And we're trying to approach these big questions in a way that's different than the way the world is approaching big questions right now. The world is becoming an increasingly challenging place to have challenging conversations. And we want to be different at Hope. So I'm going to introduce our speaker in a second. But first I want to announce one thing, and I'm very excited about this, that today we're announcing, as an institution, a new partnership with Comment Magazine. Comment Magazine is run by a woman named Ann Snyder, who has become a friend of Hope College. Actually, she's visited twice in the last 18 months. She was here most recently in March for the Catalyst Summit. Comment Magazine is a publication that tries to look at big questions, big public questions around public good through a lens of Christian theology. In their words, they are devoted to renewing the social architecture of society rooted in 2,000 years of Christian social thought. So they've tackled issues recently in their magazine. They've tackled issues like political ideology. How should you look at political ideology through a lens of Christian theology? Their most recent issue is on gender. How should we look at questions of gender through Christian theology? It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool what they're doing, and I'm excited about this. So stay tuned for an email that will give you all the details. You'll get free access to the magazine, free access to their content. They have podcasts and other things. Today, I'm really pleased to introduce our main speaker, Dr. Justin McBrayer, who describes himself as a philosopher who likes to work on important human questions, very much aligned with what we're trying to do here at Hope College. He is the Associate Dean and Professor of Philosophy at Fort Lewis College in Durango, Colorado. He has a new book out called Beyond Fake News, Finding the Truth in a World of Misinformation. So we're really excited to have you here. Please join me in welcoming Dr. McBrayer to Hope College.
Thank you, Matt. Who's seen the new Mission Impossible? Apologies to the rest of you. I'm about to spoil it for you. If you've seen the new Mission Impossible, somebody shout out, who's the villain? Who's the bad guy? Who is Ethan and company struggling against? Who? AI, that's exactly right. The entity. The Mission Impossible movie is unique in the sense that the villain in this case is no person, no country, no state. The villain is artificial intelligence. It's the first time in the Mission Impossible series the bad guy isn't a guy. It's a computer instead. But what's more interesting isn't the villain, but the victim. The victim in the new Mission Impossible movie is the truth. It's not a person. It's not a state. It's not a way of life. Artificial intelligence is manipulating the information scape around us in ways that benefit itself. In fact, there's this one clever scene in the movie where there are a bunch of government bureaucrats in a huge room with typewriters in front of them as they frantically type out information to put it in physical form that can't be altered by the artificial intelligence. It's a way of capturing truth in a way that couldn't be manipulated by this artificial system. And I think that's a perfect way of encapsulating this crisis that we find ourselves in. An epistemic crisis that's rocking the human world like nothing has since perhaps the invention of the printing press. We find ourselves in a world swimming with misinformation, and that misinformation has all kinds of implications. It has implications for our health. Think of the kind of information that circulated during the COVID pandemic. It has implications for democracy. Think of the misinformation circulating around election security. It has implications for international relations. Think of Russia's misinformation campaign when it comes to their own people and the struggle in Ukraine. So I can't think of a more critical issue for us to think about together during this critical issue symposium than this idea of truth, what it is, how it's difficult to get, and how we can do better. So that's what I'm going to do for the next 45 minutes or so with you. I want to think together with you about, first, what truth is. Second, what prevents us from getting to the truth? What barriers are there that block our access to the truth? And then third, how can we do better? What can we do better to think clearly and to get to the truth? That gives me 3 parts of the talk: truth, barriers to truth, ways of doing better. And in each case, I also want to end that section of the talk by saying something about what Christianity has to say about truth, about our access to the truth, and about doing better. Hope occupies a unique niche in the higher education landscape, and given its Christian commitment, it's important for us to think together as Christians about this question of truth and how we can do better. So, without further ado, let's think about truth. What is it? Pontius Pilate asks, what is truth? Well, if I were in the audience, I would have said, here you go, Pontius Pilate. Here's what truth is. It's a match, a correspondence between a description and the world. There are lots of ways of describing the world. Those that match up with the way the world is are true. Those that don't match up with the way the world is are false. We have descriptions when we believe things about the world, when we say things about the world, when we tweet things about the world. All of those are describing the way the world is. And since truth is this correspondence between some description, some statement, and the way the world is, what that means is that truth is black and white. That's because the world is black and white. Reality is black and white. Sometimes people put this point by saying that truth is absolute, or they talk about absolute truth. And I think that's the idea here. Truth is this objective feature of the world. It's not something that we create. It's something that we discover. Truth is black and white because the world is black and white. Either the election was stolen or it wasn't. Either the climate is warming or it's not. Either the COVID vaccine reduces infections or it doesn't. There's no in between. These are just facts about the world. They either hold or they don't. Now, what that means, among other things, is that truth is not relative. There's no such thing as my truth or your truth. Oddly enough, just before the session started, I grabbed my Critical Issues Symposium pamphlet, and I saw that the first talk after mine today is titled My Truth, Rhythm and Drum. Now, with all due respect to the professor offering that talk, I don't think what he means to say is that the truth is actually relative. What he means to say is my way of expressing the truth is relative. My grasp of the truth is relative. But the truth itself is not something that's relative. There's no such thing as your truth or my truth. There's just truth. But that doesn't mean that there aren't shades of gray out there. The eye chart remains black and white even when you're looking at it from a great distance. It might appear gray. It might appear blurry, but it's not. The blurriness in our world, the grayness in our world, is introduced by fuzziness in our language, and it's introduced by fuzziness in our evidence. Our language is rarely crystal clear. Is it raining in Holland, Michigan? Well, it depends on what you mean by rain, and depends on what you mean by Holland, Michigan. My kids ask me, is Ukraine winning the war? I say, it depends on what you mean by win. Do you mean, are they advancing? Do you mean, are they getting new weapons? Our language is fuzzy, and we need to precisify our language if we're going to get a clear view of the truth. Further, our evidence comes in shades of gray. Saying that the truth is objective doesn't mean that you see it perfectly. It doesn't mean that you see it with certainty. It doesn't mean that your evidence isn't ambiguous. The evidence is relative. Our beliefs are person relative. Our confidence is person relative. Our lived experiences are relative. But that doesn't mean that the truth is. It means that our view of the truth is fuzzy. Truth can remain black and white. I think all of this is consistent with the overall Christian view of what truth is. There's a consistent biblical message of truth being the same for all people, of truth being important to the way people live their lives and to what makes life valuable. And there's a consistent biblical message about the problems with living lives of lies or deceit. In fact, the Christian tradition pits two central characters against one another. On the one hand is Satan, the father of lies. Well, look, you can't have lies unless you also have truth. So if you think it makes sense to have a character who's the father of lies, you've got to be committed to the idea of there being this objective truth. But further, in contrast to Satan, is Jesus, who's described as the way, the truth, and the life. Exactly. So I think this view of truth that I've pitched here, that truth is a correct or accurate description of the way the world is, lines up really well with the Christian message of what truth is and why it's important in our lives. So shifting from the first part of the talk about what truth is to the second part, why is it so hard for us to get it? If I took any two of you and put you in a room together, it wouldn't take very long for you to disagree about something. And we already saw from the eye chart that that's what we should expect. People see the world differently. So what is blocking our discovery of the truth? I want to mention three different problems, three different barriers that keep us from the truth. And here's the first. Our perspectives on the world are limited. You see the world through a tiny pinhole. You're seeing a mere fraction of what's really out there. I can think of no better analogy for this than the story of the blind men and the elephant. If you don't know it, here's how it works. Some blind men are led up to an elephant, and they get to experience it for the first time, and one of them latches hold of the trunk and says, "Oh, this is great. Elephants are like snakes." Another blind man was led up to the side of the elephant and is touching his side and says, "What are you talking about? Elephants are nothing like snakes. They're like walls." And another man has his arms around the legs and is thinking, "Look, both of you are missing the truth here. Elephants are like tree trunks. Someone has the tail," and so forth. The idea being, each of these blind men is experiencing the world, at least one aspect of it, but their perspectives of the world are limited. They're not seeing the full picture. Notice the limitation isn't about the truth. The elephant is just there. It's perfectly objectively true that the elephant has a trunk, legs, sides, whatever. The problem isn't on the truth side of the equation. The problem is on our side of the equation. It's our grasp of the truth that needs to be improved. This limitation in our perspective leads us astray every day. Did you have a bad reaction from the COVID vaccine? That changes your perspective about whether that vaccine is effective or whether it should be mandated. Have you ever been pulled over for driving while black? You'll have a very different perspective on institutional racism than peers who haven't. Do you watch Newsmax and Fox News at home? You'll have a very different perspective on what it means for an election to be stolen, and so forth. Each of you is experiencing the world through the tiniest of pinholes, and that blocks you from seeing the world as it really is. Problem number 2. The world is filled with big questions. Let me introduce this distinction between big questions and little questions. Little questions are questions that you can answer on your own without any help from anyone else. And I learned a distinction like this because when my kids were in elementary school, their teachers wouldn't solve problems for them if they could handle them themselves. They taught our kids to distinguish between little problems and big problems. Little problems are one that you can handle without the teacher. Big problems are ones that require the teacher's intervention. You ran out of crayons that were the right color, little problem, you sort it out. You know, your friend is punching you, big problem, teacher will get involved. Same thing with little questions, big questions. Little questions are ones that you can answer on your own at a moment's notice, and you can do so reliably. Is it warm in here? You can figure that out. Am I hungry? A moment's reflection, you can answer it. Are children usually smaller than adults? Little question, no problem. But many of the questions that we face in our world are big questions, questions that we can't answer on our own intuitively by listening to our gut or by introspecting. Does ginseng prevent colds? Is the climate really warming? Are voting machines reliable? Don't trust your gut for answers to those questions. Those are some of the things that you can't figure out just by reflecting on them on your own. And it turns out that many of the things that are most difficult, most confusing, the things that are most polarizing and provide fodder for the culture wars between those on the right and the left are big questions. And the problem is humans don't like to be agnostic about big questions. When was the last time you had a heated, controversial political discussion with someone that ended by them saying, I don't know what to think about that. I'm going to remain agnostic for now. Fat chance. When was the last time that you went home and had a political conversation with grandma or grandpa that ended with them saying, I'm not sure. I think we should defer to the experts about whether that's so. Again, fat chance. Humans like to have views. We like to know what's going on. We like to think that we see the world clearly. And so even when we're confronted by a big question that we can't answer reliably, we naturally gravitate to an answer and then stick to it. That's a problem if we want to know the truth. Here's a third problem. We're not truth computers. Human minds are wired for all kinds of things. They're not wired solely for the truth. In fact, if you were going to invent a species and your top goal for that species was to believe true things about the world, humanity wouldn't be on a top 10 list. Our minds are wired to survive, not to think clearly and truly about everything that we might encounter. Now, if you've had an intro to psychology class, you probably know something about this. Psychologists call human processing motivated reasoning. We don't just reason about things in a cool, calculated manner like Spock from Star Trek. In fact, we have a mix of motivations. Yes, we want to have the truth, but we want other things too. You can see this when we watch the news. Yes, we want to be informed about what's going on in the world, but if we could do it while watching those liberals get it, that's even better. If we could watch it while, being entertained at the inaneness of the conservative movement, we'll take that over truth anytime. Humans are a mix of motivations. We want a variety of different things. In fact, our minds are wired to produce beliefs even when they're not fully accurate. These things are called heuristics. And again, if you've had psychology, you know about confirmation bias, anchor bias, and so forth. But let me just give you a few examples. Sometimes human minds are wired to get you speed over accuracy. For example, most of us form beliefs about whether a person is trustworthy upon instantly seeing their face. You see someone's face and you instantly have an intuition about whether you can trust that person or whether you can't. Needless to say, you're not always right about that, but that's how your mind is wired. Sometimes we want comfort over accuracy. I'll pick on my own profession here. 90% of college teachers think that they're better than average at teaching. You don't have to take a statistics class to see that that can't be true. And yet we feel good thinking that way. I sleep better at night knowing that I'm in the better half of teachers. 90% of us believe that way. It's better for us to believe something that's comfortable rather than true. Third, sometimes we want social benefits over the truth. Solomon Asch was a psychologist who ran some really interesting studies about conformity in the 1950s. He would put participants in a room and ask them which of two lines on a board was taller. Now it was perfectly obvious which of the two lines drawn on the board was taller. But unbeknownst to the participant, there are a bunch of research Confederates in the room, and they would all say the shorter line is taller. So here's the person, at the end of the line, they're thinking, it's obviously the one on the left, but everyone else says the one on the right. So I guess I'll say the one on the right. A huge number of participants went along with the crowd for the social benefits of agreeing with the people around them rather than believing or saying the truth. This happens all the time, and it's an impediment to our grasp of the truth. You live deep in Trump country, it's going to be more comfortable for you to believe certain things about our country. Your social life is going to go better if you just believe those things rather than resist them. You find yourself stuck in the middle of a politically liberal university, well, your life is going to go better. Your career might go better for believing the kind of things that are believed by those around you. Humans want social comfort over truth. So the punchline is that all of these tools that we're using to discern the truth in the world around us, those tools are not perfectly calibrated to the truth. They're calibrated for human success, which does require a lot of different things. You have to be able to cooperate with one another. You have to be able to find mates and raise children and so forth. And those things require skills other than truth. But it means that we should be careful when we're thinking about what the world is really like. Now, that may not be a hopeful story about humans, but I actually think it's the Christian story. The Christian take on humans is that we are epistemically frail. We're not perfect believers. Our handle on the truth is fragile. And I think that this part of the Christian story goes all the way back to the fall. I don't care if you think about the fall as like some literal event that happened in the Garden of Eden, or if you think it's metaphorical for human evolution, but the story of creation, the story of the fall, is telling us something important about humans. What was the name of the tree in the Garden of Eden that Adam and Eve were not allowed to eat from? That's right. It's not the tree of good and evil. It's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The fall is about knowledge. The fall is about epistemology. The fall is about a break between your understanding of reality and the map that you have in your head. I think St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians matches this perfectly, which is why it's on the slide. For now, we see through a glass darkly, but then we'll see face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know even as I also am known. The human view of the world is occluded by all of these things that stand in our way. That's the Christian view. Humans are important, but we don't have a perfect grasp of the world that's around us. So let me shift to the third and final part of the talk. How can we do better? Now, asking that question, if my kids ask me that question, my first response is, well, what do you mean by we? Do you mean how can individuals do better? Do you mean how can families do better? Do you mean how can societies do better? What kind of laws ought we to have, for example, about censorship and so forth? I want to think about what we can do, where we means those of us in the context of academia, those of us at colleges and universities. That's obviously relevant for this audience and for the role that you play here at Hope College. But furthermore, I think the university is the greatest tool that humanity has ever devised for figuring out what the world is like. So it's really important that we think about the university's contribution, what the university can do to help us be better thinkers and better discerners of the truth. So I'm going to give you 3 solutions. Each of these solutions, is aimed at what universities can do, and each of them stands as a kind of solution to the problems that I outlined earlier. Here's the first thing that universities can do. They can cultivate diversity. This is obviously going to be a solution aimed at this problem of limited perspective. If each of the blind men has only a partial view of what reality is like, because they only have a hold of one part of the elephant, what's the obvious solution for helping them figure out what elephants are like? You get all of them in the room and you get them talking to one another. Oh, I thought elephants were like walls. No, they're like snakes. No, they're like ropes, and so forth. But if each person can share their individual slice of reality, their perspective on reality, then we get a holistic picture of what's really going on. Notice that if we get those men together in a room, but we're missing one of them, we're going to miss out on an important aspect of truth. If the tail guy isn't there to tell you about the tail of the elephant, you're going to be missing an important slice of what elephants are like. So universities ought to cultivate diversity. Now, I sort of cringe when I say that because there's no such thing as diversity per se. In today's political language, it's common for people to talk about diversity, but diversity just means variety. So there's no such thing as just point-blank diversity. What we want is epistemically relevant diversity. We want people coming from a variety of backgrounds, a variety of walks of life, so that we can figure out what the world is really like. Now, I know some of you are conservatives, and you're probably gritting your teeth at the idea that we need diversity. Oh, Justin's just advocating for another woke ideology here. We need diversity. Now, hold on, hear me out. Conservatives care about diversity too. They just care about different kinds. So when progressives typically talk about university diversity, what they mean is race or ethnicity or gender or something like that. But conservatives are concerned about diversity at the university level too. They want viewpoint diversity. They want political diversity. They want religious diversity. They want class diversity, something that goes unmentioned in typical discussions about diversity at the university. So conservatives care about diversity too. And if the university is serious about getting a holistic picture about what the world is like, we're going to cultivate relevant diversity in our institutions. In particular, I should point out that universities do a pretty lousy job of this. I hate to be down on my own profession, but it's true that American institutions are not diverse in many of the ways that they ought to be. They're overwhelmingly white. They're overwhelmingly upper class. They have far more people that identify as LGBTQ than the average American population. They're way more secular than Americans as a whole, and they're far more politically left-wing than Americans as a whole. It would be hard for me to paint an accurate picture of what that's like, so let me just give you one quick anecdote. A student newspaper at Cornell University did a quick study after the 2018 election. You can get public data on who's teaching at Cornell. You can just get a search of the website to figure out who has positions in the faculty. And the Federal Election Commission maintains public records of who donates to political campaigns. So some clever journalist just got those two maps and cross-matched them to figure out where faculty at Cornell had donated money in the 2018 election cycle. Well, it turned out that faculty at Cornell that year gave nearly $300,000 to political campaigns across the country. $300,000 across all the faculty at Cornell. Of that amount, how much do you think went to Republicans? Shout it out. How much? No, it is more than zero. Some guy in microbiology gave $100 to the Republican Senate campaign. That's it. That is a stunning ratio of political support. It would be hard to find a less politically heterodox place than the American Academy. And if you care about seeing the world for what it really is, that's a bad thing. Will Hope College do this? Will Hope College cultivate the kind of diversity that we need to see the world clearly? Here's what that would mean. It would mean that you welcome voices that are different from your own. That might make you uncomfortable. They might tell you elephants are like snakes, and you know full well that they're like walls. But that's what cultivating diversity means. Think about what kind of diversity matters for truth. It's going to be a wider range of diversity than those often flagged in the media. And do what you can here at Hope College to cultivate a student body, a staff body, a faculty body that gives you that kind of diversity. Here's the second solution. We should deploy academic methods that work. This is a solution that's aimed at this problem of motivated reasoning. People believe things for all kind of crazy reasons. You believe them because it's comfortable to believe them. You believe them because people around you believe them, and so forth. And since we can't reliably answer big questions on our own, we need to develop tools and methods that help us get to the truth. We can't use our guts to answer big questions about climate change, vaccines, and so forth. We're going to have to use the tools that the university has honed over 1,000 years to answer those questions well. Universities are great at that. Just think of the scientific method. We come up with some question that we can't answer on our own. Clever scientists devise experiments that we can run to test various hypotheses or answers to these questions. If we're serious about getting to the truth, we need to develop those kind of experiments. We need to deploy those kind of methods. We need to use that kind of technology and not just rely on our backgrounds, our guts, our intuitions to answer hard questions. Will Hope College do this? Here's what it would look like. Students and teachers are going to need to work together to go beyond their first impressions of an issue, to go beyond their intuitions. They're only going to answer big questions with reliable methods. That means we need libraries. It means we need labs. We need field studies. Faculty and students will have to work together to use the methodology, the technology, the methods of academia if we're going to answer big questions. Last solution. We need free competition of ideas. If we get all of the blind men in a room and then we cancel 2 of them, we're not going to find out what elephants are like. We need to hear from everyone so that we can get a robust picture of what the world is actually like. Think back to what I said about motivated reasoning. Human minds aren't perfect truth computers. That means what seems false to you might actually be true. What sounds crazy might turn out to be the way the world really is. Put the same point another way, offense is a bad guide to truth. In fact, maybe most true things will offend someone or other. So keeping ideas out of the university because they're offensive is a bad way to figure out what the world is like. In fact, the flip side is also true. What seems true to you might actually be false. Many of the things that faculty and students believe and say are being championed for bad reasons. People are saying them because they're comfortable saying them. People believe them because it's comfortable to believe them. People are holding them because that's what it feels like in their gut, rather than what the evidence actually says. So what are we supposed to do? Some of the things that seem true are false. Some of the things that seem false are true. How are we going to sort that out? Well, the answer is there's no a priori way to do so. And in 1859, John Stuart Mill gave the crispest answer to this question, to this conundrum. He says, you have to let ideas duke it out in the public forum. As iron sharpens iron, the ideas can come into conflict in a public arena where people can point out that your reasons for believing that are bad, and here's some other evidence that you didn't consider, and so forth. There's no way of sorting the true from the false privately. There's no way of sorting it if some voices aren't allowed to speak. Will Hope College do this? Here's what it would look like. It means students have the courage to speak their minds in class. It means faculty choose the very best books and articles without fear of social media cancellation or administrative pressure. It means student journalists printing hard-hitting investigative stories without recrimination. And that's actually more the norm. In a 2020 survey, nearly 2/3 of student newspapers reported receiving some kind of administrative censure or pressure about the things that they wrote. And it means an administration that will encourage open and honest and civil discussion on campus. All of that, I think, fits well with the Christian view of academia. I don't know if you can read the Latin words here, but this is the motto and the logo of Harvard, at least as it was in its first iteration. The Latin says, Veritas Christo et Ecclesiae, truth for Christ and the church. Now, if you know anything about Harvard today, you know the Christ and the church part are cut off. I mean, yeah, you can actually just do a Google search and look at the Harvard logo, and those little banners on either side are gone. And now the Harvard logo is just the shield with Veritas. But the central point is that Harvard was founded as this idea that Christians could work together to figure out the truth of our world, that universities played an important role in Christian life. If you've taken a theology class, you probably know the distinction between general and special revelation. Special revelation is a message that's special in the sense that it comes to some people and not others. So, for example, the Holy Spirit's working in your life, a message from a priest or a pastor on a Sunday morning, or the message in the Bible being a special revelation to some people. On the other hand, there's also general revelation, things that we can learn about God just by looking at the created order, just by looking at the world around us. Christians thought the university was important for understanding general revelation. Christians have always thought that the university played an important part in the life of the church and the life of Christians. If you think about some of the classic Renaissance thinkers, Galileo, Kepler, Newton, Locke, they thought they were reading the language of God when they looked out in the world. And they thought of their work at the university as being central to that. So in sum, the truth is out there. It's black and white, even though our view of it is not. And there are these barriers that get in the way of our understanding the truth. We're not truth computers. We have a limited perspective of what's going on. Our view of the world is occluded in various ways. But at least those of us at the university can do better. We can cultivate true, epistemically relevant diversity. We can allow those voices to speak freely. And we can rely on the methods and the tools of the academy to think better about the world that's around us. And I think that's a hopeful story. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. McBrayer. Thank you all for being here. We are going to open up for some Q&A. We have roughly 10 to 15 minutes, so we've got plenty of time. Please ask, but we'll run around and bring you the mic if you have questions. I already see Sawyer. I'm just going to go.
This feels like a game show. Come on down.
I will actually stay here. So just in the sense of diversity in an educational institution, and then you get into questions of like seminaries and monasteries, you can't foster that much religious diversity because they all agree on Christian doctrine. So do you think that the traditional model of a monastery or seminary is beneficial, or is it hurting because you aren't exposed to secularism as much for a certain set number of time, like a certain number of years? And then how does that impact ministry as people leave those institutions?
Yeah, that's not one question. That's a set of questions. So let me try to give you a sense of what I think. How much diversity matters about some particular issue depends on what it is you're trying to do or what it is you're trying to figure out. So, for example, if your goal is to try to contrast, for example, Orthodox views of God versus Catholic views of God versus Protestant views of God, what I think is you better have Orthodox people and Catholic people and Protestant people all in the same room. If you just get a bunch of people who are Roman Catholics in a room and ask them about the true conception of God and ask them to compare and contrast that with, say, an Orthodox view of God, they're not going to do a very good job. Sorry, Catholics, because they're seeing the world right through their own peephole. So I think whether you want to cultivate a particular kind of diversity just depends on what question it is you're trying to answer. So to sort of flip to the end of your question, I think seminaries are preparing people to do a wide variety of different things. So on the one hand, yes, they're trying to equip people who can answer questions about God and about the good life and what a religious community would look like. But they're also equipping people to be pastors and caregivers and counselors and serve a number of other functions. So I think given that diversity of function, it's perfectly appropriate for seminaries to focus on, say, one faith tradition as opposed to another.
Hi. So kind of talking about truth, I guess, would you say that even the notion of preferences just means that they have limited understanding of a topic? Like if you lay out a question, you bottleneck the cognitive thinking about what you can answer. You say, what is the best fruit? Someone's answer is limited by their understanding because no one can truly have an opinion if the only real opinion is the truth. What do you think about preferences? Are preferences real?
Yeah, thank you for that question. In fact, it brings up something. It brings up a concept that I think often muddies the water when we're thinking about this very thing, and that's the concept of opinion. So let me say something about it really quickly. In my house, the word opinion is a bad word. My kids will have friends over, and my friends will say something like, in your opinion, what's the best? And my kids will cut their eyes at me like, did you hear what this kid just said? So, and it's because I've given them such a hard time when they bring up this concept of opinion. As soon as they say, what's your opinion? I say, what do you mean? Do you mean what I like or what I think is true? Those are two different things. The word opinion is messy in English because sometimes it picks out our preferences. In your opinion, is dark chocolate better than milk chocolate? But sometimes opinion is picking out what you believe. In your opinion, was the 2020 election stolen? So notice, opinion is functioning as two very different things there. One is a preference, one is really a belief. So now to circle back to your question, I think when people are giving their reports or answering questions, we ourselves are sometimes muddled between those two different things. Are we saying what we want to be true, but not what we actually think is true? Are we saying what we prefer, what we desire, or are we saying what we actually think is the case? Those are two different things. So what I want to say is, when we're trying to think about what's true, let's keep that on the thinking side of our brain and not the preference side of our brain. Be clear that you're asking someone you're asking about what they believe about something, not about what they prefer. And just leave the term opinion out of it altogether.
So you said that in order to get the best ideas in the world, we need to have a free discussion of thought. How do you think it's best to deal with actors who are not engaging in a civil discussion, who are promoting hateful or unruly in that space of ideas?
Yeah, great question. In case you didn't hear it, the question was, well, look, if we need this free exchange of ideas, how do you deal with unruly characters who, are not allowing for a free exchange of ideas? So let me say two things about this, because I think this is a really important issue and one that touches at the heart of something that universities are trying to inculcate. On the one hand, we ought not be shutting down speech merely because we find it offensive or we find the idea that's being expressed offensive. So on the one hand, I do want to say that. Just because someone's expressing an idea that you don't like, that's not enough to shut them down. On the other hand, if you don't listen to what the other people are saying, the free exchange of ideas means nothing. If it's just a shouting match, you're not accomplishing what it is you're trying to accomplish. Imagine you get the blind men together in a room and you want to talk about the elephants, and one guy is just shouting down all of the other guys. You're not going to find out what elephants are like. So on the one hand, we shouldn't be censoring speech just because we find it bothersome or offensive or even just think it's flat out wrong or evil. On the other hand, we can't allow some voices to dominate or shout out or drown out others. So I think universities, this is a hard thing. You're inculcating a balance. We need to allow people to say things even that others find disgusting or harmful. And on the other hand, we need to make sure that everyone gets a chance to speak and that there's real listening happening. And I think the university is navigating between that Scylla and Charybdis, and I think that's a hard thing to do. But that's exactly what we have to do if we want to hear from limited perspectives.
This actually follows up on the last question. So the way that you answered the last question, it sounded like, almost like this is what you were saying, that we shouldn't exclude certain kinds of speech because of the content of the speech. We find it offensive. But maybe we can exclude speech because of the form in which it's given, i.e. loudly yelling, not listening in return. I'm wondering what you think about cases where the content of the speech might itself undermine other people in the spaces standing to be included. So if I say the N-word and I yell it, okay, obviously bad, but what if I say it nicely? I think people are, and I'll listen to you back, but I'm going to continue. So in that case, you might worry that the content of the speech, or if I say, Jewish people this or something, even if I say it nicely and I listen, you might worry that the content of the speech is undermining other people in the room's capacity to feel that I can also say something and that it matters. And I take it that a lot of times, and I think cancel culture has bad aspects to it, but when people cancel people or exclude ideas, I take it a lot of the time they're doing it because of this kind of concern that they have, that the content of the speech can also undermine other people's standing. So I wonder if you could say a little more about that.
That's a great question. So this question is, how do we handle not just ideas, but the delivery of those ideas or the words that we use to deliver those ideas? Not just the manner of speaking, but the language that we're using to express particular ideas. There's so much to say on that particular topic. Let me just say two things. First, there's no one kind of forum for speech at a university. A university is actually a multiplicity of very different spaces, all of which have different rules. So, for example, if we're talking about like the speaker's circle, like some public area out on campus where anybody's allowed to come and speak, there I think the rules that dictate what's allowed to be spoken in that case just are whatever legal rules exist in that particular space. And maybe in a space like that, we can't control someone's use of words or language or whatever. What happens in my classroom? Very different space, right? Where I can control and ought to control the use of particular kind of language that might deplatform or undermine other people. What happens in a college residence hall? Yet another set of rules. So I don't want you to hear me as saying there's just sort of one univocal set of rules and it's just, the wild west of ideas everywhere. I agree with you that I think we need to be sensitive to the particular context, and there are ways of inculcating language or using language that won't inculcate an open discussion. Here's the second thing I want to say. I want to say that universities as a whole ought to be sensitive to exactly the point that you're raising, and college graduates ought to see how language can have exactly that kind of effect. This is how it sometimes feels to me being in the academy. People on the left are so busy shutting things down because it might have these deplatforming effects. People on the right are just so busy championing free speech, say whatever you want, that no one's saying that we actually need both of them to do what universities are supposed to do. We do need to let people speak. But if no one's hearing, if no one's working together, if we're not actually hearing from all voices, what's the point of free speech? The point of it is to figure out what's going on. So I actually think we need both of them if we're going to figure out what's true.
How do you think we should combat like self-censorship in higher education?
Oh, yeah, I see you. Say it again.
How do you think we should combat self-censorship in higher education?
Yeah, great question. How do we combat self-censorship in higher education? Self-censorship being the idea that you refrain from saying things that you think are true, are relevant, are important for a discussion for fear of what might happen to you. That's a real problem in higher education. If you don't think so, you can use your phone after the talk and go look at Heterodox Academy's survey of free expression on campus, and you'll find that most college students censor themselves from speaking ideas that they think are important. And interestingly, many faculty do as well. So what can we do to prevent that, given that we want to hear from all voices if we want to figure out what's really going on? Here's the clearest thing we can do. We can provide institutional incentives for speaking your mind. We can acknowledge when someone says something that's hard or says something that might be at odds with, their personal stake in some situation. In other words, we want to make people comfortable with the idea of saying things that, that might have social costs to them. Here's how I do it in my class, just to give you one concrete example. I'm a philosopher. Societies have killed philosophers for being, rowdy and challenging the status quo, and we talk about controversial things in my classes. For example, in my ethics class in the spring, I let my students pick some topics to talk about at the end of class after we work through different ethical theories and whatever, and then they pick some applied issues at the end of the semester. Here are the three they picked: sex work, the legality of drugs, the rules governing transgender athletes. I mean, you want to talk about self-censorship? You've got a recipe for self-censorship right there. So here's what I tell my students. Just because you say something in class or ask something in class doesn't mean you really believe it. It's just your chance to try on an idea. Like, you can even phrase it this way. Well, what if some people think that? It doesn't mean that you're committed to that. It doesn't mean that you think it. But this is a way for you to kind of try on an idea, see how it works, and then flesh it out with your classmates. Those are the kind of incentives I think we need to allow people to express ideas that otherwise might be socially unpopular.
Okay, I think we have time for one or two more.
Hey, so this is more of an argument. So you said that it would be good for ideologies to clash in the public space, whereas I'd like to believe that, but I think if you say canceling is a bad thing, it's almost like you're contradicting yourself, because I'd say canceling an ideology is just that ideology losing in the public space. Does that make sense?
Well, clarify one thing for me. Is your worry that certain ideologies in general just should be excluded from the public discussion space?
No. I'm thinking they should approach the public space, and if they get canceled, it's because they lost. So we heard them out and we said, you're wrong.
Yeah, here's my worry with that. someone has to make the decision about who's wrong. Someone has to make the decision about who lost. Someone has to make the decision about which ideology is less evidenced than some other ideology. I barely know your president. I met him less than an hour ago, but I don't want him making that decision. I don't want Donald Trump making that decision. I don't trust any human to make that decision. That's why I think that a priori we shouldn't be excluding voices from those kind of public squares. That's why I think we need ideas to push against ideas, because I don't trust any human, given our frail grasp of the truth, to exclude the right views from consideration.
So if canceling isn't losing in the public space, then how does an ideology get proven wrong?
Through evidence, through argument, through use of the scientific method, by doing the things that universities are good at, by pointing out that the people who are believing particular things don't have good reasons for them, by pointing out that some of the views that are being circulated in the public sphere are self-serving, by pointing out that all of the evidence is against particular ideas. That's, I think, how the bad ideas get weeded from the good ones. I think there's no better way to do that than to provide a forum for ideas of the sort that a university can provide.
One more tiny add-on to that. So how would you say that's different from an ideology getting canceled?
Well, I'm not claiming it's easy. I'm claiming it's the only way.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, here is our last question. So I want to be a historian, and you mentioned Galileo and everything, but how can I find out, like, the truth about, like I know the truth about knowledge and logic, but how can I find out the truth about, like, history and dates? Like, do I go on the internet, or are books still accurate?
Well, if the question is everything I read on the internet true? The answer is no. So I'll just give you kind of a really general answer, and then maybe we can chat more later if you want to. Every academic field cultivates its own methods and tools to figure out what's true. What that looks like in history is very different than what it looks like in philosophy, which is very different from what it looks in chemistry, which is different again from anthropology. But that's what each of these academic fields are doing. Your professors, your faculty are trained in thinking through issues in particular ways, using particular resources, using particular tools to answer big questions that we can't answer on our own. In history, that looks like digging through archives. That looks like matching up different accounts of a story to see where it maps up with reality. It deals with, traveling to places and doing digs and looking at remains and so on and so forth. That's very different than what the tools look like in biology. But that's the broader point. The broader point is there are ways for us to answer big questions. And the academy has clustered our disciplines in ways that you can learn the tools, the methods, the skills that you need in each of those domains to answer those domain-specific big questions.
Okay, that is all for the Q&A. Thank you all so much for coming, and a quick reminder. Yeah, let's have a round of applause. Thank you so much for coming out.